Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host, and I am very, very happy you are joining me today. We are going to get right into it. I am welcoming back good friend, awesome person, man across the pond, brother from another mother, Jon Atack. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Chris, it's been far too long.
Oh, it's ridiculous. We spent literally an hour catching up just to hit record on the show. We have so much to talk about. But today we are going to hyper focus on Jon's new book. He literally just published a new book, and I wanted to get right to it and get word out on this. So this is jumping to the front of the queue in my podcast queue right now because I'm very, very excited about this. The book is called If Scientology Ruled the World, Magick, Space Aliens, and the Second... Oh, no. If Scientology Ruled the World, Nazi Occultists, Sex Magic, Space Aliens, and the Second Coming. Just a few things to titillate your attention there, Jon.
Yeah, I wanted to get kittens, cookery, and golf in, so I got all the clickbait, but we ran out of letters.
Yes. Well, I was honored to be able to read the manuscript for this and give a little bit of feedback, and I learned so much. If those of you out there who have been following my work or following my channel for a while, you know I did that 4-part series breaking down L. Ron Hubbard's affirmations, and then another video breaking down L. Ron Hubbard's Lucifer Bulletin, kind of bookending Hubbard from the beginning of Scientology and then at the end and kind of where his head was at. All of that was informed by and inspired by reading this book by Jon, which really put my head in deep into sort of philosophical, spiritualist underpinnings to L. Ron Hubbard's belief system and what he personally believed, not what Aleister Crowley believed, not what Madame Blavatsky believed, but what Hubbard himself believed and his own personal spin on that stuff. And we spent some hours breaking that stuff down, but it was this book and Jon's work that kind of got me hotted up on looking into all that stuff. So thank you, Jon, for that inspiration. And let's go ahead and talk about this book. First off, what inspired you to dig in and write this thing? And what is it about?
It started when I left Scientology. That a few months after I left Scientology, somebody gave me a book called The Morning of the Magicians by Pouls and Bergier, translated from the French. And it was a mad nonsense book that it was a huge bestseller way back. And they put forward the view that the Third Reich was completely a magical operation, that the members of Hitler's retinue were occultists and they were performing all of this stuff. Now, this book is largely fabulism, but it tickled my curiosity. So I found as the years went by, I found Ravenscroft, The Spear of Destiny. And again, all of this stuff about, the Pouls and Bergier say, there's a regiment of Tibetans at the fall of Berlin and all this kind of stuff. And they were really... And
oh, wow.
Ravenscroft, halfway into his book, says that he's getting material from the Akashic records, kept by the Lords of Karma. And you're going, oh, no. Maniac. It was some years before actually informed historians, Michael Wood, who had actually spent 3 days with Michael Wood long ago, but before he did, he's a broadcaster and author, he did a thing about Himmler's Wevelberg Schloss, where he was holding courses in meditation and yoga for SS officers, where he had a round table for when King Arthur was going to come back. So
wait a minute, you're saying Heinrich Himmler, the guy who basically was in charge of SS and all kinds of Nazi operations, had a round table in anticipation of the Knights of the Round Table coming back and led yoga sessions for Hitler's inner circle.
Yeah, for the heads of the SS, and he is the second most powerful man in the whole Reich.
Yeah,
He commands one
yeah,
and a quarter million troops directly, SS troops, um, and so I over the years, then Nicholas Goodrick Clark, his book is the turning point, where an actual historian, although one influenced a little by esoteric practices, as I later found out, um, he takes it apart and says, this is what we've got documentary evidence for. If you
hmm
go to Wikipedia, you'll see his work referenced and certain mistaken statements made. And you and I have talked about Wikipedia, and I have retained certain references from Wikipedia, but only when they're to general things like when something, when the Night of the Long Knives was, or what have you.
sure.
I would, because as you have, I actually looked at the page references they gave in Goodrick Clark, and it doesn't say what they said. And having read
Mm,
Goodrick Clark 3 times on the subject,
mm,
I started out thinking, well, it would just take me a few weeks because for 40 years I've been accumulating this material. I read Goodrick Clark years ago, and it needs to be talked about. I think the clincher was this tremendous last manuscript at L. Ron Hubbard Jr., who was pretty much his father's henchman from 1952 to 1959. And as
yeah.
far as I can tell, the only person who got really close to Hubbard in terms of what he believed and was really doing. And
hmm
he makes this assertion that his father continued to practice ritual magic. We have the admission from Scientology's NPR people in 1969 that he was involved with Jack Parsons when they said Hubbard broke up black magic in America. That's why he got involved. We have Hubbard himself talking about Parsons and what a brilliant man he was and that he knew him. And of course, calling Aleister Crowley my very good friend
That's
in
right.
1952.
That's right.
So the
And not
connection.
and more than and also so many little anecdotes and hints sprinkled all throughout Scientology lectures about magic, the history of magic and ritual, and more than your average bear's amount of knowledge on a topic that in the 1950s not a whole lot of people knew a whole lot about. So just to throw that onto the fire as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, Hubbard, of course, recommends that Scientologists read the Master Therion, Aleister
Mhm.
Crowley. Um, uh, I didn't know that, and I didn't read it at the time. Having read it, and over the years, of course, 35 years ago, published Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, we won't talk
And,
about that.
so the connection between Hubbard and the occult is significant.
Yes.
And there, there you mentioned the Lucifer Bulletin, the student briefing for OT8.
Yeah.
I've confirmed this. I think there are now 4 confirmations of it. 2 people who took the course and 2 people who were instrumental in putting it forward. I don't think any of them want me to mention their names anymore. But there is no doubt that this bulletin was the original student briefing for about a week when OT8 was released. The highest level of Scientology in 1988 had this bulletin on it. And in it, Hubbard says that he's with Lucifer and the Antichrist, that the entire purpose of Scientology is to stop the second coming of Jesus Christ because it will be an invasion of Marcabians. And the thing that convinced me it was right is that there's this little reference where he says, I started thinking about this in 1945. That's when he met Jack Parsons.
Yep. Yep.
Then they tried to conjure the Antichrist. There are so many confusions about
They
this, the
did.
Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, whichever name we use. And he references the book of Revelation, the
Yep.
last book of the Christian New Testament. So that's the purpose of Scientology. I didn't get that. Nobody told
Yeah,
me that.
yeah, that wasn't in my bulletin. That wasn't in
So
my TR's reference.
there were so many strands to pull together. One of them was,
Oh,
I knew Captain Bill Robertson, and for about 8 months, he was coming and going in my life when I left Scientology. And as I was leaving, I read his sector operations bulletins, or SOBs, and he's basically saying that these are telepathic communications received from Ron Hubbard, L. Ron L. Ray, as he calls him there, on the mothership in 1982. Now,
Yeah,
this may
Captain
well
Bill was a character beyond all characters that I have ever seen in Scientology history. There was nobody like Captain Bill.
no. And I did a video called "The Craziest Scientologist" on this subject a couple of years ago. Um, he, yeah, he was. You find these people that there's something about them that's really attractive. There's something, his personalities. He was a big personality,
Yeah.
but he was absolutely enslaved and spellbound by Ron Hubbard,
Yeah.
and lived within the L. Ron Hubbard fantasy, and published these sector operations bulletins, which you can still find on the internet. And uh, the night that I announced my departure from Scientology, the 18th of October 1983, I hosted a meeting of about 60 disaffected members. It was the first time such a meeting had ever taken place in the United Kingdom. And of course, we had people from the Office of Special Affairs standing on the door taking names to make sure that we felt properly intimidated. We had
Yeah.
David Gaiman, who'd been the head of Hubbard's PR for 15 years before joining the Crims at Gilmore Hot Springs or in Happy Valley, digging ditches and being broken emotionally. He turned up to tell us to go another mile with the church and remember Ampronistics. And we're all sat there going, remember what? Ampronistics was a splinter group in about 1965.
Yeah, very
I
old
didn't
squirrel
remember them. I'd
group.
never
Yeah.
heard of them. But Bill had got this thing about the Marcabians. He was mad. The Marcabians had already landed. They were in Switzerland. They were in Basel. They were working through this corporation. They ran transcendental meditation. They were going to take the planet over. There were 200,000 of them already here. By 1986, gold prices would collapse and they would take over. And this is what he was teaching back then in 83, 84. Now, as
Wow.
I fairly quickly pulled away from Scientology, having been a true believer, and just going, this stuff is, oh dear, I believe this. How embarrassing. I probably better not tell anybody, that I ever did this. So I tried to keep quiet about it. But Bill kept coming round because he was staying with a friend of mine, Mary Sylvie Patterson, who was a wonderful woman. And they were for 8 months. He was living in her house, and he'd keep coming round and saying, oh, John, we need you. We need you back in Scientology, and we need to get you back, on purpose and at cause and all this kind of stuff. And there was still this thing about the Marcabian invasion that we're going to take the Earth over. And so when I started writing this book, I got the OT8 bulletin. I went through, searched lectures, and found some fairly anodyne references to the Marcabians. They apparently don't like income tax very much, or they do like it very much, and they make you pay it. But there was nothing severe. And so I thought about it. I wrote to somebody who'd been a watch messenger, somebody who'd been with us, put on a daily basis in the mid-70s, and said, did he talk about the Marcabians then? Answer, no. So what's this about the Marcabians? Then I remembered where she'd gone, young Miss Gillam Grady, Janice. And so I wrote to Janice, who's always been really helpful, I've got to say. She's always been very helpful. And I said, you were last with him in 79. Was he talking about Marcabians? And she was like, was he talking about Marcabians? Huh. So it had come back. And of course, this bulletin, although it was actually compiled by Ray Mithoff, the date on it is 5 May 1980.
Mm-hmm.
So there, just before this, he's starting to freak out about this possibility of this alien invasion.
Yeah.
So put that together and started going, well, what would happen if Scientology ruled the world? If this is the senior datum in Scientology. The purpose of Scientology is to stop Jesus and his Marcabians from coming back. You and I both know that despite all its pretensions to be compatible with Christianity, Hubbard was absolutely derisive of Christianity. You know, the heaven
From
brought.
the get-go,
Yeah.
very early on.
Yeah.
He was saying things blatantly, openly. 1954, 1955 lectures where he's just accusing the church of being a control operation, straight up,
Yeah.
and that people are sending their prayers to myths, from Scientology and effective knowledge. So yeah, he was very derisive very early on.
There's a note in the original, one of the original publications of what became the Phoenix Lectures from 1954,
Mhm.
where he says that the creator of the universe will be found hiding under a rock as the last being to be cleared. So he has a huge negativity towards Christianity. Christ was an implant, he says,
Yeah.
is implanted 75 million years ago. So you've got all of this going on, and the purpose of this is to undo Christianity. And I started looking at that and going, well, if Scientology ruled the world, oh dear, there would be e-meter checks on everybody to see if they were a Marcabian.
Yeah.
Because Captain Bill's thing was, they inhabit human bodies. Anybody that disagreed with Ron Hubbard or Scientology would de facto and in fact be a Marcabian.
This is
And that,
and this is for real, like legit. This is what Scientologists believe. They believe in and we haven't really laid a lot of foundation. Let me just say real fast.
sure.
The Marcabian Confederacy or the Marcabian the Galactic Council and Confederacy. There's a lot of words and phrases used to describe this operation, but it's this galactic empire that Hubbard imagined exists, and he called it Marcab. And he said that these were a kicked in the head civilization that looks an awful lot like modern civilization. And he's writing this in the 1960s with fire engines and houses and mortgages and all this crap and fedora hats. He even says fedora hats. And that this is a spacefaring technological civilization, and that so they have spaceships and stuff, and of course you connect this with Xenu and you get, spaceships that look like DC-10s. And they have an invasion timetable of some kind. They are invading planets and engaged in conquest. They're not just a planet all on its own out in the middle of space. They're an empire, and they have empire aspirations. And another part of the key backstory of this is that you mentioned Jesus is an implant. He is part of an implant, which is about softening up populations so they can be taken over. And Jesus is this Messiah figure. And it's a little bit like if you all have seen that movie Dune or read the book Dune, you know about like this idea of implanting a population with the idea of a savior figure that's coming, and then then you arrange to have the savior figure show up. You own the savior figure, you control that population through religious indoctrination. That's one way of softening up a population. And Hubbard spun this tale that that's us and that Jesus is part of this control operation. So just to give a little background on all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's very useful. And it's worth mentioning that Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, knew L. Ron Hubbard and said that Dune was about groups like Scientology. So there is
That's
a very
funny because I wondered if there was a connection. I never saw if there was a connection. Thank you for making that, because I wondered, because it was such a I brought it up recently in a show I think I did where I wondered about that, and I brought up the Dune parallel because it's the easiest, and it's right in popular culture right now. So it's like, hey, there it is. That's what we're talking about. But I wondered if Frank Herbert was inspired by L. Ron Hubbard at all, and sure enough, there you go.
Yeah, one of that little group. I mean, L. Sprague de Camp, who co-wrote Conan the Barbarian, wrote a piece called L. Ron and the City of Brass. And I corresponded with him in the 80s, and he was a hoot. He was great because he was like, well, obviously this guy is, he's a con artist. Don't you people see this?
Yes.
But also put forward the idea that we are living on a prison planet and that there are invader forces on Mars and Venus. And as you pointed out, Hubbard said that there are train lines on Venus. Now, Venus has a median temperature of about 400 degrees centigrade. And for those who are not familiar with the centigrade idea, that's 4 times the boiling point of water. So, your railways are going to be run by bacteria, possibly, which are the only things that can live at that temperature. So you got this mad idea also, and that we've got these 3 planets. We've got this really cold planet, Mars, which we want to make a home for Elon Musk as soon as possible, which is a median temperature of minus 40 degrees.
We
And
can
that
send
works
him
in Fahrenheit.
tomorrow. We can send him tomorrow.
Please. Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be one of the 2 out of 3 of his rockets that explode. I don't mind if he survives, as long as he's on Mars. And we say, sorry, you're breaking up now. We can't, sorry. But the idea that if you'd conquered this planetary system, that you were going to live on Venus and Mars and make a prison of this wonderful planet on which we are, that's kind of super stupid. But that's the way it went. I was saying before that Nibs, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., made this statement in the Telling of Me by Me, which I've been privileged to see and under, I can talk about it but not copy it as yet. I've had it for like 12 years now. Still going, look, it'd be really great to put this thing out there. But he says that his dad got the magic from the same man who gave it to Hitler. And I'm kind of going, okay. That is a hell of a statement. And surely the only person who can have told him that is his dad. And so I then start looking back through the Hitler stuff and find that, yes, there was a whole group of them. The founders of the Nazi Party were affiliates of the Thule-Gesellschaft. Gesellschaft apparently just means society. Thule is the land in the far north from which the Teutons, the Hyperboreans come. And I'm kind of, well, where does this stupid idea come from? Because I'm starting to see this Marcabian thing and Aryan race fantasy in, this is a similar kind of thing. You have this despised population that you can exterminate because they're not really human. They're just vermin. They're just getting in the way of everything. Now, for Hitler, we know the Jews and the Romani were high on that list. But of course, he'd also taught in Mein Kampf that Slavs, the word Slav and the word slave, same thing. And as I researched further, I found that there was a directive from Himmler to the SS to exterminate 30 million Slavs on the march into Russia. They came very close. Some estimates say 27 million, at least 20 million people. And so they had deliberate orders to and they went through Belarusia, they went through the Ukraine, into the Soviet Union, murdering as they went. And it's an aspect of the war that's probably not talked about enough. We absolutely should talk about the Shoah.
Absolutely.
And the destruction of the Romani and the Jews. But
so many people
remember that, also we have contemporary neo-Nazis in the US who believe that they are Aryans. And yet often their descent is Eastern European. So they were in fact the slave people as far as Hitler and co. But I'm sort of, where does this Aryan idea come from?
Yeah.
And I've read lots about neo-Nazis and all of this stuff. Where does it come from? And it was shocking. It enters history in 1882. A book written by a guy who served 4 terms in the US Congress, who was called Ignatius Loyola Donnelly. He also wrote a book saying that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare, and he wrote a book saying the Viking gods were real. And he comes up with this Lost Continent book, Atlantis, the Lost Continent, where all he has, Plato makes 2 references to this. He's told this story by an Egyptian priest that 9,000 years before, there was a continent that sank, and it was called Atlantis. And there's 1 mention in Herodotus, the historian. That's it. Yep. And out of this, he weaves this fantasy of this place. He gets its position wrong. If you look back to Plato, there's this thing about the Pillars of Hercules, which is very complicated, and we won't get into it here. But there are a number of locations that are called the Pillars of Hercules. So Donnelly places this continent just outside, just beyond Spain and Portugal, really, in the Atlantic. And 6 years later, Madame Helena Blavatsky, the one of the three founders of the Theosophical Society, writes a book called The Secret Doctrine, which is 1,500 pages long and interminable. And she claims to be the pupil of Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Sufis, Tibetan masters, Indian fakirs. And one of her biographers said she was probably the most learned, if not the wisest woman of the 19th century. And you do get this sense that she is phenomenally well read. But she's piecing this thing together. She says that she learned this secret language, translated this secret book from the secret language. The secret book is not available to us anymore. It's a bit like Joseph Smith and the Mormons. But
a pattern we've seen before, yes.
Yeah, but here it is. Here is all of this wisdom. And she does actually expose the secrets of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and all of this. And one of her companions, she then talks about there being different root races.
That's right. This blew me away. This blew me away. I had no idea this woman had written about this. I've been talking about Blavatsky. I've had Joe Zimart on my podcast talking about Blavatsky. We've talked about the root origin story of Scientology connected with Blavatsky. But this race thing, I had no idea she had done this or was connected to the Nazis through the Aryan connection here, as you're describing. Anyway, I just wanted to say this blew me away. Please continue.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are all sorts of variants among theosophists. I read one recently that suggested that the first intelligent life on Earth was more than 1 billion years ago. She says, as far as I can tell, that between 200 and 300 million years ago, these discarnate entities, that is to say, beings without physical form, were here, and that we have devolved from these, so we get, as we are more sinful, we become more solid.
Right.
And so gradually.
And that concept is rife in Scientology.
Yeah.
Hubbard uses that kind of metaphor to describe how sin creates mass, which literally is weighing a person down. He made many jokes about it.
Yeah, and these are the ridges of Scientology and how things become rigid.
Yep.
And of course, in Dianetic auditing, you'll be asked, is it erasing or is it going more solid?
That's
and
right.
There is this idea of this kind of diaphanous other theta world.
That's right.
Which comes pretty directly from Madame Blavatsky. Yeah. She has the Fohat, the fire mist, out of which everything comes. And basically, then you have organisms that breed, but they're intelligent, but they breed by splitting. So they have kind of amoebic cellular splitting and then creatures start having sex. And there's the inference that sex is in and of itself sinful. So things are going to get worse and worse. But hey, come on.
That's right. That's
what
right.
What is life about if we can't do that? And from gradually you have the other continent of Lemuria, you have Atlantis, and you have these beings, and eventually you have the rise of the Aryans. Now, yes. We've put a little chart in the book because it's all so confusing, and they don't provide us with little, just to say it's 300 million years ago, about 1 million years ago, maybe 2 million, somewhere in that, the Aryans come along, and they are inhabitants of Atlantis. Now, Heinrich Himmler gets very big on this idea, and he decides that they are the gods, their originators, and they arrived in shards of ice, which is, as you pointed out, is like the ice cube thing in Scientology. Spirits encased in ice. Yeah. And they had...
Hubbard took so much of this, guys. I'm just telling you, conceptually, thematically, there's so much of what Jon is saying buried in Scientology's DNA, all throughout it.
Yeah, and the upshot is this idea of electron powers, that the pituitary and pineal glands are now redundant, that we do now actually know what they do. But they certainly didn't in 1888. And she's as with Hubbard, she's presenting something as if it were a science.
Hmm.
And um, she's definitely in contention with Darwin. This is the big thing, that the universities are having a problem because Charles Lyell has come along and said, "Oh, the world's not 6,000 years old, as Bishop Ussher worked out from the Bible. It's more likely tens or even hundreds of millions of years old."
Yeah.
And then Darwin is a big fan of Lyell's, and expands this further with the notion that he and Wallace have, Alfred Wallace, of evolution by natural selection. And in the spiritual marketplace, this is absolute anathema. How can you possibly believe this? And so she is basically positing a counter hypothesis to Darwin, which is it appears to be enormously complicated until you boil down the 1,500 pages to the 5 pages that you actually need to say this. And we get to the Aryans. Now, she's a socialist. She actually is wounded in the Battle of Mentana, trying to establish the Risorgimenti, the government of Italy, by a group of Freemasons. Oh yeah, let's get into this. Of course, a group of Freemasons that also founded the United States. And I really didn't want to believe that, but it appears to be true.
No, it's there.
Yeah, the freedom of religion in the US is not the freedom of Christian worship. It's because they were deists; they weren't Christians.
Hmm.
Some of them. So that's a whole other
Discussion.
things.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I
But
know.
she's a Freemason, banned by the Nazis. She's a socialist, banned by the Nazis. She's a woman, should be in the kitchen, according to the Nazis, or having babies in the Lebensborn. So there's no way that she would have given this stuff to Hitler. But then we get this character, Dr. Franz Hartman, and he's recently been relaunched. There's a Franz Hartman Society, and I got in touch with him. I
Oh
did everything I
no.
could to clarify what I was saying. I went through 4 of his books. He was very intelligent. He was a medical doctor. He was an eye surgeon. There's some question as to whether he was qualified, but he was practicing Colorado, actually, for some
Oh.
years. He was from Bavaria in Germany, where, of course, the Nazi Party would be born. Hartman was greatly enamored of Madame Blavatsky, so much so that he traveled to India to see her. And he says, he'd been to all of these spiritualist meetings, and they were all phonies, they were all fakes. But then he read Blavatsky and went, "This is the real deal," and packed up his bag and went to India to meet her. They become great good friends. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that Madame Blavatsky was a habitual cannabis smoker. So, which kind of explains the 1,500 pages, I think, but bless her. But
Perhaps there's hypergraphia demonstrated there.
yes, so we're very definitely looking at a predominant symptom of temporal lobe epilepsy, which we've both talked with Yuval Law about.
Yeah.
Yuval and I are talking about maybe writing a book with some examples of this, because it does seem that many of our religious and political leaders had this condition. And as all it takes is a kick in the head to get it started.
It is the most common form of epilepsy out there.
Yeah, and
it's not a rare minutia condition. If epilepsy is there, it's probably TLE.
Yeah, and you can't necessarily see somebody having the fit, of course. They don't have grand mal seizures.
That's right.
They might just have a little flickering of the eyes or a smacking of the lips. Or
that's right.
In Hubbard's case, he would throw his arm up at the beginning of lectures, which we didn't know before talking to Hannah Whitfield, who was there, and said, yeah, he had this funny thing of he'd give the name of the lecture, having asked what day it was. That's one of the things I love about his lectures. He doesn't know where he is. He'd give the title of the lecture, say something about it, and then his arm would go up and he'd start talking about something that had nothing to do with it, which we all noticed that he'd just tell stories for half an hour, and then he'd come back and maybe tell you something about how to miss or withhold or
That's
something
right.
like that.
That's right. Very rambling, his lectures. He really would go on a very wide beam, getting to the point of what he had to say. And Hubbard's lectures are classically an hour, 90 minutes long. And he really could. Even when I was in Scientology, I started thinking to myself, I think I need to distill this down to like the two sentences that actually matter here, because the rest
Yeah,
of this is just fluff.
yeah. And
Yeah,
that loquacity, that need to be talking, but not talking about anything in particular. Of course, Hubbard is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's most prolific author. So
that's right.
hypergraphia, tick. He also, of course, said he was breaking Broncos at the age of 3.5, and maybe one of them kicked him in the head.
Exactly.
Um, one of his
Exactly.
schoolmates from when he was 15 said he was terrified of horses. So there you go. But
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. I am convinced that somehow as a child he did develop or had those TLE symptoms, because I think there were in looking at all the stuff, I think the visual hallucinations and the guardian spirit were there with him from very young, you know.
yeah, it was certainly by the time he's at George Washington, when he's what,
Hmm.
20, 1920, he is seeing
Yep,
the Empress,
that's
and
right.
she's telling him what to do. I mean, we're talking about magic here. Come
That's
on,
right.
guys.
That's right.
Um, so
But getting back to the Aryan thing, so let me just ask a question real fast about this. So this guy, this
Dr.
Aloysius
Dr.
Loyola guy,
Ignatius Loyola,
Ignatius,
yes,
yeah, he
Donnelly.
comes up with this idea of the Aryans.
Yep.
Madame Blavatsky fits that into, and sort of incorporates that into her 7 or 8 original races thing, and they're
They're the
this
they're the fifth root race.
fifth
Yep.
root race.
Mm,
She puts that in her secret doctrine.
mm.
And then this guy we're talking about, this doctor guy, reads that, goes, makes friends with her, and he forwards this
He
concept.
he he befriends her before the secret doctrine is written.
Oh, okay.
Um, and um, it's a fascinating relationship. I mean, when I read him, I couldn't make sense of it. He seemed to be, if you accepted these ideas, and we did when we were Scientologists, and of course the majority of people in the world accept ideas of spirits. Um, Only a few skeptics, such as ourselves now, who are not so convinced of this idea, but most people do.
Yep.
And Hartman thinks that the Theosophical Society is ridiculous. And he writes a novel satirizing it, and Madame Blavatsky publishes it. So you've got this really interesting relationship between them. I didn't come away from reading about Blavatsky and think that she was calculating, cunning, and evil in the
Mhm.
same way. I'm sad to say, I think we've proven by now L. Ron Hubbard was. I
Mhm.
think she was genuine. She believed these things. I mean, I think Hubbard believed the
Hubbard
things he was
believed
doing,
too. He just had his own
but he
spin
want
on this stuff.
he wanted to dominate people through
Yeah.
it. Whereas I think Madame Blavatsky truly thought she was enlightening people with it.
Right.
Hartman goes on to do two really interesting things. One of them is he becomes a founder of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Eastern Order of Templars.
Bing. Eastern Order of the Knights Templar, which I also learned from your book. I was like, oh, that's what that means.
Yeah. And they are practitioners of sex magic.
Yeah.
And it
And
doesn't
this is
fit it.
before Crowley gets involved.
Yep, this is around the start of the 20th century. Crowley is in the Golden Dawn at this time,
Hmm.
and the OTO actually accept some of his ideas into their practice. And in the 1920s, he takes it over.
Yep.
So we have the founding of this sex magic tradition, which will become the basis of Scientology. Many years ago, 30 years ago, wrote a
Yep.
paper called Possible Origins of Dianetics of Scientology, which I think is one of my most brilliant titles. It's so snappy. And the major source for L. Ron Hubbard's ideas is Aleister Crowley. There's no doubt about this. There's a
That's right.
PhD, David Barrett, who wrote a book where he said there is no doubt that Hubbard practiced Crowleyite magic, but there is no evidence that any of the ideas went into Scientology. And you're going, yeah, that's because they were renamed. When we talk about thelema, thelema, or the will, it's called intention in Scientology.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
when we talk about the magical powers that you're going to achieve by practicing the way of thelema, those are the OT powers, the operating thetan powers. That the fundamentals are the same in these two
Even,
subjects. So,
even the elemental spirits they refer to in the OTO and the rituals become body thetans in Scientology. Well, via they become entities, then they become body
yeah,
thetans in Scientology. I mean,
and we
there
know,
are so many things that are just shifted right over into
yeah,
Scientology and renamed, repackaged. And this is where Hubbard invents his own thing and creates his own spin on this stuff.
yes, absolutely. And the more time you spend around this stuff, and you and I have spent far too much time around it, um, the more you realize that it is actually fairly simple and straightforward. You know, Scientology appears to be enormously elaborate. There is a Hubbard statement about somebody who makes the subject too complicated so that nobody will understand it. An
He revealed
altitude
all
teaching.
his secrets. He did. He just said it was all the bad guys doing it, but
Yeah,
he was the one doing it.
yeah.
He
And
did.
you know, concealed in plain sight. In
That's
the
right.
again in the paper I wrote called "Never Believe a Hypnotist," which was certainly the most shocking thing to me in all the research I did, finding out that he just candidly admits that these are the methods, the ways of controlling people. We have
Yeah.
ways here of making slaves. We can brainwash faster than the Russians, 20 seconds to total amnesia. What are you talking about? He goes to Kennedy, JF Kennedy, and says, buy my conditioning techniques. It's like, okay, you can use them on your astronauts. All right. He writes the brainwashing manual and pretends that it was Beria, the head of the Russian Cheka. All of this incredible confluence of scams and cons that comes out of this. Franz Hartman is not only one of the three founders of the Ordo Templi Orientis, he's also a member of the Guido von List Society. Now,
And what's
this
that?
is von List was firstly, he wasn't that German von, meaning of an aristocratic family, and you could be prosecuted for using this falsely. But he and his disciple von Liebenfels, both of them adopted these things by buying their way into a family. They were both of them,
Mm.
I'm sad to say, like me, born peasants. Um, and Curiously, Blavatsky actually was entitled to a von because she came from a German aristocratic family that she grew up in modern day Ukraine, but part of the Russian Empire, from a military family. Um, in fact, I believe her grandfather was a prince, but she never used it. But
Hmm.
these guys did. And von List, that you know, just this incredible story of this guy who, as a teenager, has this vision, temporal lobe epilepsy. Here we come again. His father is taking a group around the catacombs of St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna one dark, dismal night. And he loses the group and finds himself in this particular place. And he's suddenly struck with a vision, and he declares that he will make it his life's work to worship Wotan, Odin, Woden, the man for whom we name Wednesday to this
Yep.
day,
Yep.
Woden's Day, Woden's Tag. Um, and he sets about doing that. And he creates a system that is as mad as Blavatsky's, which has all sorts of weird absurdities in. And many German-speaking people, you've got this sundering of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's gone into decline. They were defeated by the Prussians in the 1860s. And they're basically, having been a great world power, they're now sinking. And there's this fight between the many different ethnicities within this group. So you have Austrians and Hungarians to start with, but you also have all of the Romanians, who, of course, Dacians, who have their own language and culture, the Magyar of the Hungarians, the Czech. All of these groups are seeking identity at this time in Europe during the 19th century, when that's really the big thing to have a nationalistic identity. It gives us the music of Dvorak, the music of Sibelius, Czech and Finnish nationalism. There are Russian things. And you have what's called pan-Slavism that comes out of this, which we are still seeing in contemporary Russia. The idea of the Slavic Empire being one whole unit. because of people who are within the same language group, which may not be
Hmm.
the best of reasons to unite a people. Then you have the pan-German idea that comes up at the end of the 19th century. And Guido von List is a pan-German who is basically saying, we are the Teutonic people, we are the Aryan people. Franz Hartman is a member of the inner circle of the List Society. So he's a founder of the OTO and he's a member of the inner circle there. And they pass their ideas of Aryan race theory very directly over a very short period of time to the founders of the Nazi Party.
There it is.
So that's Rudolf Hess, who'll become deputy leader of the Nazis, Hans Frank, a guy called Sudetendorf, all laid out in elaborate detail, point by point, in If Scientology Ruled the World. And then you have where that leads. Once you believe something as stupid as this, that your descendants came from the heavens, they miscegenated, they bred with inferior beings. And Blavatsky talks about the progeny of these interbreedings being dumb, so that they could not speak their sin, and being covered in orange fur, which is, I haven't met these people yet, but they're probably around it. They're probably just shaving it off every day so I don't notice. Who knows? And there's this awful puritanical view. And I don't think she meant this, but Theosophists and, of course, Anthroposophists, this is the other part. I have quite a swipe at them. Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of Anthroposophy in about 1913, he ran the Theosophical Society in the German-speaking world. He ran one, Franz Hartmann ran the other in the German-speaking world. And there's an argument when the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky died in 1891, I think it was. And so she's gone from the picture, and this woman called Annie Besant takes over in India, and they decide that the Messiah has been born. It's Jiddu Krishnamurti, and he's going to save the world. And Steiner goes, no, don't agree with that. And he takes the whole theosophical following that he has and creates anthroposophy.
Okay.
He too, as we show, is a believer in Aryan race theory. Right. He believes that the German people are the superior people among the Aryans, because Aryans would also include Scandinavians and the British, Northern Europeans generally. And you get this mishmash of ideas out of which Nazi ideology comes. If you talk to a contemporary neo-Nazi, they've got no idea what Aryan race theory is. Mm-hmm. That's kind of weird. It's not that long ago.
And it was considered by these people, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's throw a little bit more context into this.
Absolutely.
And please do correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, from what I read of your work and all the stuff around this, these people were thinking about this from a scientific perspective.
Yes.
This was not a religious, faith-based, I believe the Aryans. They position this in their mind as rational, scientific thinking, and that Blavatsky had laid down the science on this. And this was, as you mentioned earlier, sort of the counter science to the very burgeoning, growing psychology, the roots of sociology and psychology around this time period. Evolution is happening. Like science and industry is a thing. It's a force in society now. And these folks are in a way analogous to analogous to anti-vaxxers, a little bit like, well, no, we have the science. We know what the science is. This is the science over here, see? And this is how it is. And there are these races, see? And this is how it went, see? And we're part of this, see? And they had these, these scientific reasoning and tests and stuff. I just wanted to put that out there. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
And at the end of the 19th, in 1874, you have the smallpox epidemic, which will kill a huge amount of people. And that's when the anti-vax movement begins.
Right.
Because vaccination is made compulsory by the British government and by various American states, and people protest. In fact, the term conscientious objector, which I always thought was to do with the military,
Oh, yeah.
arises at this period where
Oh,
an English Act of Parliament determines that you can be a conscientious objector and not receive a vaccine. After a protest
interesting.
of something like 100,000 people in Leicester here, just a few
Wow.
miles up the road.
Wow.
So, and it was a big issue in the American states. You know, how dare you demand that we do this? It was a kind of pre-run of the terrible Andrew Wakefield nonsense about MMR,
That's right.
followed by, of course, the idea of Bill Gates injecting us all with something, which he probably did, frankly. He would if he could. Um, but as he pointed out, you've all got so
It shows the timelessness of this kind of what are we going to call it? The style of thinking, the push pull of societal, progress versus regress, or conservative versus progressive. I mean, there's a lot of framing you could do here, but it really does kind of highlight the human, the eternal struggle of the old and the new, and the no, this is how it is, no, this is how it is kind of thing, and this is my rights, and no, you don't have that right, and how do we protect society? These are age-old questions. This is all stuff going on 120 years ago that we're talking about right now. So I find it kind of interesting and worth commenting on that fact. But I really wanted to make sure we were clear on the fact that this wasn't a religious faith. This was people approaching this as though they were doing science.
yeah. So very much like Scientology, you have a
Yeah.
pretense of science,
Yes.
and people very, believing in authority figures who tell them this is scientific. Now,
Yeah.
when we look back, Wallace and Darwin were in fact wrong about how gene mutation happens. And it was only when the Abbe Mendel's work, which had been ignored, was factored in, that there was this realization that you're not intermixing, you're not mixing together all the genetic components, they still remain separate.
Right.
That, if we trace it up to modern times, we come to Richard Dawkins' idea of the selfish gene, and the idea that genes are self-replicating and they'll always be the same. Well, that's nonsense. But that was held as hard science until the beginning of this century, when epigenetics finally, and then the proofs were there from the Swedish famine for quite some time. And there was a biologist called Waddington in the 1930s who worked this out. But there's often a long period of discussion of the evidence, of trying to arrive at a more rational conclusion and then seeing if it works. Now, in the 19th century, this led to eugenics.
Yep.
And here there is so much that I saw that was counterintuitive to me. So the rise of eugenics, the idea of destroying one supposed race. We are, in fact, genetically only of one race. We have a little bit of Denisovan, we have a little bit of Neanderthal. I'd probably have a bit too much of it, who knows? But for the most part, we are Homo sapiens sapiens. And
isn't it funny how I just got to throw this out there because it just bugs me so much. It really bothers me how much mileage people have gotten out of the entire concept of race as an excuse to hate other people with different physical characteristics. It's mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing to that when you really start challenging the concept of race, you find there's nothing there. It disappears when you try to actually, well, what do you mean? And of course to the haters, it's really no different than, well, they're just a different skin color. Can't you see it, you idiot? Their bone structure is different. Don't you see it, you moron? You're like, okay, cool. This is awesome.
Absolutely, yeah. And the reality, like it or not, is that our ancestors were black, all of us. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And they weren't Aryans a million years ago. Our ancestors as Homo sapiens, as far as we know now, when I was a kid, it was taught that we were 35,000 years old as a species. We now maybe 400,000 years from the fossil evidence that there's Homo palestrinus as an interface.
Mm.
There are all sorts of interesting things. And the work on the Denisovans, this is something that's fascinated me for years. I wrote a piece nearly 40 years ago about hominid evolution and got thrown into all of this amazing stuff about Australopithecines and Homo robustus and all of this. But there weren't intelligent life forms. I mean, one of the things Blavatsky gets into is these battles, air battles that were fought for more than 1,000,000 years. And you're going, there would be something left of this. If you walk over any place where the Civil War was fought in the United States for 4 years, or the Civil War was fought in Britain for 4 years, notice that civil wars are always 4 years long, but you will find the lead. You will find the spent bullets everywhere on those battlefields. If you go to Flanders Field, World War One lasted 4 years as well. See, it's all, oh yeah.
It's a conspiracy.
If you go to Flanders Field, you will find the shrapnel. There is nothing left of 1,000,000 years of warfare, aerial warfare, where they were using explosives. No, come off it. What's more, they didn't have aeroplanes because, of course, in Madame Blavatsky's time, it's like L. Ron Hubbard with OT3. It's all 1966. So they had balloons, dirigibles, so in 1,000,000 years, they hadn't worked out that technology. And of course, have left nothing. This is just fanciful. It's just a point where, and we've come to this so many times before, the feelings of knowing, which William James talked about, in 1902 in The Varieties of Religious Experience, that we have to learn, if we are ever to grow up, to differentiate between what we would like to be true, what we want to believe, and what we can demonstrate to be true, what there is evidence for. And so I got into the whole history of eugenics, because if we were going to have Marcabians, I thought we needed to understand the steps of this process whereby people come to be convinced. Now, I'm not sure, as yet I haven't read every book that's been published. So it's very possible that somebody has said this, but I've not seen it said that the Nazis disproved Aryan race theory. They put so much work into this in their 12 years of power. They traveled, to Tibet. They went to Finland, to Sweden. They chased the stories of the Cathars in the south of France from the 12th and 13th century. And they did measurements of calf muscles, blood types, fingerprints, ear shapes, the cranial measurements, which have been so popular in the 19th century. You're going to be able to prove all sorts of things from the bumps on your head. And
that's right.
It's absolute nonsense. At the end of it, the scientists, and these were scientists, they were people running universities, and they were doing abysmal and awful things, but they had the scientific training, they had the doctoral degrees. They disproved it by saying, we can't tell you whether somebody is Mediterraneanoid, Teutonic, or Jewish. We cannot. There are no reliable measures. And with modern genetics, of course, you can check the genome and you can say, well, actually, I read a couple of books by a genetic biologist along the way to try and get my head around this. And he's saying everybody has Aborigine genes, let alone Aryan or not Aryan. Australian Aborigine genes will be found in everybody. So it's a matter of how much of which type. And of course, you have this modern fallacy that you can trace somebody's genetic origins from their DNA. Well, yeah, in accordance with the other people in contemporary times in those populations. And because of the movement of populations, it's saying somebody, oh, you're 10% Mexican and 10% this. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. But we do get to this point. It came to be believed in the 19th century. The most famous exponent of this is the man who invented the word eugenics, meaning good birth, Sir Francis Galton. Mm-hmm. And who was a brilliant man. He invented the dog whistle, among other things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was a big advocate of fingerprinting. It largely was adopted in the UK because of him. He was a cousin of Darwin.
Yep.
And a friend of Darwin. And he was a genuinely brilliant man. But he accepted this idea that if you can breed racehorses and you can breed pigeons, which Darwin was very keen on, you can breed dogs, you can breed humans.
Yep.
And he went all over the country and made what he called a beauty map. And I'm not sure this is true because I've not been able to find a copy of this beauty map. And there was a museum dedicated to the man, but it's often said. And he had a little tally glove that does exist, which had a pin so that he could mark how many pretty and how many ugly women he was seeing. And they would be prize fat was one of his categories. And apparently, and I apologize in advance for this, and it's not true, but apparently the women of Aberdeen are the least appealing to Sir Francis Galton, at least. Horrible thing to say.
And it never occurs to him how subjective all of this is. I mean, this was one of the fallacies of the scientific quote unquote thinking of the times, and why I wanted to actually bring that up earlier is because these people were incredibly pretentious and arrogant about their view of science and used it. They really weaponized it as a cultural sort of weapon to inject very classist and racist ideas into the cultural mix, right? Like we know best. And these are, kind of upper crust type people, your Vaughns and whatnot, or people aspiring to be the Vaughns, who are, or Sir Francis Galton, right? I mean, these are upper crust people who
blue blood.
Yeah, exactly. We have to acknowledge that these people are not thinking, oh yeah, we and thee and me are all equal and we're all happy humans. No, the very, very different look at people, the people who come up with this. Eugenics is unfortunately one of those topics where you can logic your way into it very, very quickly. And if you don't pull the moral handbrake on that, you can convince yourself very rapidly this is a really good idea.
Richard,
yeah.
Richard Dawkins, who became a multimillionaire through the idea of the selfish gene, which is not in fact true. And then memes, this idea that social ideas also replicate, they pass unaltered. Well, I'm afraid they don't. They're altered at every retelling.
That's right.
If you hear somebody say all that glitters is not gold, then what you're hearing is a changed meme. What Shakespeare said is all that glisters is not gold.
That's
so
right.
Let's get on with this.
That's right.
And a few years ago, he put out a TikTok meme to say that, well, if we can do this with cows and horses and pigs, why can't we do it with humans? And you're going, because you're breeding for a single trait. When you look at these dogs, horses, cows, and what have you that have been bred, the cows have been bred to have more milk. That's that. The dogs have been bred, well, terriers are bred to go down holes. Terrier, earth dog.
Yep.
The dash hunt, it chases badgers, or dash as they're called in Germany. Hunt, dog. What you'll find is that with the King Charles Spaniel, for example, it's bred to look very pretty, but the brain case cannot accommodate the brain, and they very often have terrible psychiatric problems.
That's right.
Pugs,
look at pugs, bulldogs. I mean, they can't breathe.
And thoroughbred horses are nowhere near as strong as the cart horse, or as enduring or as healthy. So in fact, we've largely bred freaks.
Yeah.
And what we also know is that if you hybridize into a single species and maintain the species line, it's likely to collapse. It is through mongrelization, as Barack Obama called it, or hybridization, that we get hybrid vigor. The fact that we've only got one type of banana, the Cavendish, means that one day we won't have any bananas, because one day some bug will figure out, as the phylloxera got into all of the wines, the vineyards of the 19th century, and there was only one rootstock that was resistant to it. All of the French wine production collapsed because of this thing getting into the vines.
Wow.
And they imported the Zinfandel roots from America, not realizing they also existed as Primitivo in Italy, but that's another story, and grafted their types onto these roots, which were resistant to phylloxera. So when you'll get some bug that gets into the system, our strength as human beings will come through hybrid vigor. That is to say, by what Madame Blavatsky called miscegenation, by breeding between types by rather than, you know, the simple proof of this is the Cretin Valley from which cretins come, where if you have a small population that interbreeds, like the Habsburgs, for example, the Holy Roman Emperors, they will get big chins. The defects will. So hybrid vigor is where you're taking something in. Going back to Galton, he had the
So
stupid.
are you saying diversity is our strength?
DEI. There is strength in diversity. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
absolutely. And the idea that Galton is putting forward is that smart men should marry pretty women, and they will therefore have fantastic children. It's like, and I have met people where, you know, the ugly man fathered the daughter that looked like him, and the
Mm-hmm.
pretty woman
Mm-hmm.
fathered the son who looked like
Mm-hmm.
her.
Mm-hmm.
This can happen.
I've seen
Um,
it.
yeah, and I've also met people where two ugly parents produce somebody beautiful. It makes no sense when you look at it closely. But this, my essential idea is that absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors. This thought is accredited to Voltaire. He didn't actually ever say it.
Yep.
The second premier of India, Radhakrishnan, pretty much did. But that, to get that into the society, if you stop believing nonsense like Aryan race fantasy, then what happens is concentration camps and extermination.
That's right.
And the parallel comes back together when you look to Scientology and go, well, what if Scientology ruled the world?
Yeah.
Then we would go back to this medieval view,
That's right.
where some people were degraded beings, suppressive persons, and the best thing to do would just be to kill them.
Just get rid of him. That's right.
And this was such a powerful idea. This didn't come from Hitler. D.H. Lawrence, George Bernard Shaw. There are a whole raft of intellectuals who believed that we should practice eugenics. The problem is, until we know, you find that you've exterminated people who have a particular gene that would have been really useful. That it can be a resistance to a particular disease, or it could be something that even when you come down to determining intelligence, there are hundreds of locations in the genome that are relevant. We have no idea how to pull them apart. And I don't think AI will help us with that either. One of the things that the Nazis did that disproved their hypothesis entirely is one of the groups for extermination was schizophrenics. And not enough has been said about this, that not only did they sterilize or exterminate their entire psychiatric population, but whenever they invaded a country, they killed all of the inmates of the mental hospitals so that they'd have beds for their own soldiers if they were wounded. So you have this policy of their life unworthy of life was the expression that the Nazis picked up for this. Yeah. They also, I thought for years that the idea Übermensch, supermen, and Untermensch came from Nietzsche. That's what I was told. It doesn't. It comes from a translation of an American eugenicist, because long before, Galton never got his practices adopted. We never had a eugenics practice in the United Kingdom. In America, there were many states.
We did.
Right into the 1980s, I think Oregon was the last state to lift it. And of course, during the first Trump administration, women were being sterilized who were illegal immigrants.
Right. Yeah, we've got this kind of thing. Look, folks, we got to be clear. This kind of thinking never went anywhere. It's always running around. There's always a strain of this stuff. And when the rich and powerful, or the royalty, or the upper class, however you want to term this, when those folks who are just as human as you and me, and just as susceptible to error and illogic and emotional thinking and all the rest, when they get hold of this stuff, life becomes horrible for everyone.
Yeah.
It's prejudice, it's tribalism, it's classism, it's racism. There's a number of isms you could throw this thing on. at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, it's concentration camps and people being killed for no other reason than existing.
Yeah.
And that's where this goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the differences don't exist. There is more variation within cultures than between cultures genetically,
Yeah.
as Yuval puts it. So we see extermination, pogroms that are set out. Currently, I think it was the president of Slovenia this week made a public address to a variety of European leaders saying, why are you allowing a genocide in Gaza?
Hmm.
Why are you still supporting this country that is performing a genocide where something like 50% of the deaths are children?
Yep.
Why are we standing by? Why aren't we saying, no, we said it was wrong when Serbia tried it. We said it was wrong when Rwanda tried it, though we didn't stop them. We said in East Timor it was wrong. We said in Cambodia it was wrong. We said it was wrong when the Nazis did it. We're still, both the US and the UK, providing weapons to
It's
Israel.
to our shame, to our
Yeah,
national shame.
yeah,
It's a horrible, horrible situation. And it's, of course, as you're listening to this right now or watching this out there, all we can ask is that you do your part to raise your voice about this too. Nobody's, blaming you guys, the viewers. It's the people who can do something about this who are to blame, and they need
yeah,
to do something about it. But they're obviously not compelled to do so if they don't hear from us. So,
yeah. And it's
raise your
not, this is
voice.
one of those matters that isn't Democrat, Republican or
Exactly.
Labour, Tory, because Joe Biden could have stopped the war
And I
there
wish he
in a
had.
day.
And
Yeah.
so
And
could
that
Obama.
was,
I mean, every president going back 100 years could have done something different about this because that's how
and
long it's been going on.
some did. The agreement that there would be a division of two nations, which has been adopted by the United Nations, which was proposed by the American president, which was accepted in the Oslo Accord in what, 93 or whenever,
Hmm.
that we're in this bizarre situation where international law has determined that this is a genocide, that war crimes are being committed, and neither Democrats nor Republicans, you know, because Gaza started during the Biden administration. And he all he had to say was, "We're not going to give you any more money. We're not going to give you any more weapons," because Israel is not an independent state. It depends upon handouts from other countries and influence in other countries to do what it's doing. So
Sure.
there is a consequence of a people who were most definitely the target of a genocide. They are not racially a single people. The Jews are not, most definitely. And Shlomo Sand at Tel Aviv University has written an excellent book on this subject. They are a
I'm
group that,
pretty sure most Jews will tell you that. I
yeah,
don't think they live in ignorance of that fact that it's a more of
no,
an ethno-cultural sort of
and
thing.
it's not a religious grouping
Mm-mm.
because they have the largest amount of atheists of any religious group.
That's right.
About 40% of Israelis don't believe in God, but they believe absurdly in this imaginary community that makes them other
That's right.
to, one of the most bizarre thoughts, but linguistically and genetically, it would appear that the original inhabitants of Israel and Judea are the contemporary Palestinians. They converted to Islam. And the Jewish diaspora, those who'd spread further, and the converts, who probably make up the vast majority of modern Israelis. There are arguments about that, but I favor the argument that they are the 13th tribe, that they're Khazars from Eastern Europe with no origins in that place. And so we have this situation where they're going, we've been persecuted. It's a part of an Israeli education when you're about 15 to visit Auschwitz. And they are told, there's an amazing video made by an Israeli, a Jew, called Defamation on YouTube, where he gets into this. What do you mean anti-Semitic? And at the very end, he's got the visit to Auschwitz that the school kids make, and he's got a Mossad agent going, I don't know why we inculcate this hatred in our children, because what they're told is they'll come for you again. So they're isolating themselves from society, and you're going, the master race, the chosen people, my people are better than your people, my granddad's better than your granddad, and all of these divisive imaginary communities, rather than saying we are in fact, and I do say this in the book, we're not brothers and sisters, but we are cousins.
That's right.
All of us are cousins,
That's right.
and we should not be doing these things. And the problem is those belief systems, political and spiritual, that make people feel they're superior and better than other people without realizing that our humanity depends upon us being humane. And and our future, if there is to be a future for this stupid creature that we represent, depends upon being humane. As
That's
long
right.
as we exploit others, as long as we allow the Billy Club, as I call them, the club of billionaires, and the truncheon with which to hit people, as long as we allow them control of our lives to this absurd degree, where we are revisiting the Gilded Age. From when Donald Trump first stood and said, "Make America Great Again," and he trademarked it, I think, in 2006. I said, it's a polite question. When are you thinking of? When was the time when it was great? And after he came to power this time, he said it was between 1870 and 1913. Why it wasn't 1865 and 1917, which seemed to be more natural parameters, who knows? His idea of history and mine may be different. The end of the Civil War and the start of the First World War for the US, 1917, I would think is the period, but that's academic. But that's the Gilded Age. That's the time when people worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week in brutal factories where they had no health and safety, where people like the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies rose to power by destroying all around them. The very thing that Franklin D. Roosevelt's, even Teddy Roosevelt, was trying to stem this with trust busting.
That's right.
We have now returned to that position where a very small number of people have power and are possibly going to visit their eugenic ideas upon us because, yep, the tech bros don't really have any sense of the importance of the rest of us. They're going to give our jobs to AI without having come up with any plan about how the rest of us are going to live. That once AI's got to this.
It's all echoes, harmonizations of earlier times, because at the end of the day, culture changes, people change over time, but they don't really change that much biologically. So we keep bringing the same ingredients to every new generation, and they keep coming up with the same computations and ideas and prejudices and tribalisms and classisms because we don't change. The technology around us does, and all that's really enabled us to do is hurt more people at once. Now, admittedly, also allows us to help more people at once when we are of a proper mind to do so, and sort of find that equilibrium of forces where we can balance things out and start helping each other rather than dominating each other. But there's a lot of basic stuff going on here that leads to this, I got to get mine before you get yours kind of thing. And this is this sort of, it leads to an awful lot of bad things. And I think at the end of the day, what I learned and took away from your book, this new one that's out now, is how fragile this can be for us, and how easy it is for those in charge who get some power to let it go to their head and start letting their own prejudices rule their policies and their agendas, and whole civilizations can go, the way of the dodo because of that. And then that creates a whole new set of problems, which then move into the future. And guess what? We're solving them with the same brains and the same ways of computing and the same tribalism and the same nonsense. We've got to introduce a change into this. And for me, being exposed to the deeper underbelly and the sequence of events that lead to Aryan fantasies was just one example, a great example, very and incredibly documented by Jon in this book, that shows you path by path, piece by piece, how even somebody like Blavatsky, who may have been a well-intentioned person, but completely out of her fucking mind when it came to reality, and she plants seeds of ideas which get picked up by people who also are challenged in their view of reality and have aspirational ideas of global conquest. And you put an organization together and things come together in a certain way, and suddenly we have, genocides being carried out from well-intentioned ideas. It's that cycle that I think Jon and I would like to see us break. And until we start acknowledging that this is what we do to each other, we can't get there. It's left versus right. It's red versus blue. How about we change the script? How about we flip that and do something different? Because that way leads to the atrocities that Jon has been highlighting here. So that's my takeaway from all of this. It's powerful stuff, and I'm very thankful you put this together.
Well, thank you. And for me, it was a process of a year. I thought it would take me maybe 3 or 4 weeks to pull together the research I'd done. And I found that I had to do more reading than I've ever done in my life. And getting into the various arguments about occultism among the Nazis, I think I have drawn conclusions that have not been drawn before, that eugenics wasn't something that Nazis invented. The Aryan race theory wasn't something they invented. What they did was they latched on to a not untypical kind of pseudoscientific view. So it's true that in the last century, 120 years, the lifespan of human beings in the West has gone up by 3 decades due to sensible engineering and scientific endeavor. I mean, the first thing, the greatest medical innovation and the one that has saved the most lives is the sewerage system.
Because cleanliness matters.
Yeah, not being covered in shit, as they say in Monty Python.
That's right.
So, but you can look at it and you can say, the guy who figured out that tetanus and cholera waterborne infections were there because the water was bad, and he sealed off one pump and it went from there to understanding this is where it's coming from. And you'll then get somebody who says, no, that's evil. We've always, people got very angry about their water pump being stopped off, and he's going, but you're going to die. That resistance, that unwilling, the willingness to follow crazy people who have only one thing in their favor, which is they're certain. They're absolutely certain. And it was one of the things that bothered me throughout Scientology, where Hubbard said knowledge is certainty, because it seemed to me that knowledge was uncertainty. Knowledge is forever coming back and questioning these ideas and saying, is this true? Is this useful? Will this lead us to a better place? And, what will life be like in the future, in the next generations? What will my grandchildren say about this generation and how we let them down, and how we've lived in the most affluent time? Just a third of us are in the first world. We have lived in the most affluent time that has ever been known. We live better lives than the kings of the Renaissance and the popes of the Renaissance. We have televisions, we have smartphones, we have all of these fantastic things, and we are watching it, like as Nero was supposed to have done. I don't think he did, but because he didn't actually have a fiddle, so he couldn't have fiddled while Rome burned. But he probably was playing the lyre or something like that. We're in that situation where we're enjoying ourselves and all of the many benefits of our society, and doing stupid things, and then we can get caught up in such a sense of guilt about that we become paralyzed and don't do anything about it. And for me, we have to involve ourselves to the degree where we can maintain our own sanity and our own health. And we have to try and do something about this. And I still thoroughly and absolutely believe it's not too late. But only by understanding the etiology, the development of a disease, can we cure it. Because when we know that there are tetanus and cholera bugs in the water, we can filter the water. We can put it through sand, in fact, which is all you need to do. And they're too big to get through it. there are things we can do about it, or we can spend our life arguing about whose God is bigger than who else is God, and all of this nonsense, and developing the perfect human being. I will, as I often have before, bring up Graeber and Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything, which shows a remarkable scholar and incredibly readable scholarly book that shows that we don't have to do it this way, that there have been societies in the past that have been utterly successful. A couple of years ago, the Indus Valley Society came up. For 700 years in what is now Pakistan, there was a civilization that did not fight war. There are societies around the world that don't have murder as a crime. And then there's America, where it's do you know how many school shootings we've had in the United Kingdom in the last 40 years?
Unfortunately, yeah, I know. I
We've
know.
had one,
Yeah,
Dunblane, one. You have two a week. And
I know.
so we have to look at this and go, the etiology of this disease is these beliefs, these practices, doing these things. And even countries that have this, had Canada used to have pretty much the same gun laws as the US, it's never had this problem. You know, they've changed their gun laws subsequently as well. Australia have changed theirs.
Hmm.
But the problem is, you know, it's not guns that kill people, it's bullets. That it's about a mentality in a culture, and it's, you know, the importance of the book to me is to say we are all embedded in our culture.
That's right.
Is our culture ethically proper? Is our culture going to lead to there being any future? Or are there going to be a tiny number of people in bunkers on their private islands with the rest of us exterminated? And I think it's The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, where around about 1900, he explains what the tech bros need to understand, which is that the other people, the Untermensch, will come and eat them. So we have to make harmony and accord. We have to do something to change our beliefs, because by having better beliefs, we'll have better behaviors.
I agree. I agree completely. Well, this was a very wide-ranging talk. We went all over the place today in terms of consequences and ramifications of this in our modern culture. Agree or disagree, like it or, you know, left wing, right wing. That's not really how Jon and I are talking about this. And I hope that our examples today didn't make your head explode. And if they did, well, okay, kind of put it back together maybe, because, you know, these are broader things than left right paradigm. And that's not, you know, what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to just show up some examples. And just because we showed up these examples doesn't mean other examples don't exist just as bad in other places, you know, that you might agree or disagree with. The point is, as human beings, we need to get along better, and if we can't manage to do that, there will be consequences, you know. And so Jon and I think would like to do our part to sort of highlight what some of those consequences are, and maybe get us thinking again.
Absolutely. And you know, the thinking for yourself. We and we love to think that we do that, but we're all of us influenced.
Yep.
And by accepting that and looking at those influences, we can become self-determined. There's an expression. So, yeah, the book's available on Kindle now, all over the known universe. It'll be out on Audible. I have recorded it, and dear Spike has spent 2 months editing it to get the hiccups out.
Awesome.
And it'll be out as a print book as well. I'd be very appreciative if people would leave a comment, hopefully positive, at Amazon. And this is the initial announcement. This is the very first time.
Like I said, I wanted to get this out right away because I've read this thing. It's really good. And there's stuff about Scientology in this. You know, we really focused a lot today talking about the Nazi side of this. There is a lot we've talked about with Scientology, and there's more in the book about that and its connections with this. So so just so you know, the title of the book is not just get you over and talk about Nazis the whole time. It's very, very much about how Scientology comes from this stuff. We did talk about it today, but there's a lot more in the book on that. So I hope you guys will check it out. and read it through. It's not, 5,000 pages or anything. It's very readable. And I guarantee you, I absolutely guarantee you, you are going to learn things reading this book that you do not know right now. And it's stuff you're going to want to know about. So Jon, thank you very much for taking not only the time today to talk about all this, but doing all that reading, doing all that research. It really shows in the product you put together. It's awesome.
Thank you so much. And I think the thing to say is this is a fascinating and at times hilarious story when you realize just how crazy the run droids can be,
Big time, big time. In fact, I'll just say right now, the thing that prompted me to go on that rant earlier about how they thought it was science was when you wrote, I don't know that I'm ever going to forget this, that when the Nazi guys, the Nazi spiritualists and occultists would get together and do their rituals, of course, they wanted people who were Aryan or were going, were part of that whole thing. And so how do they determine that? Well, of course, they would measure the bumps on the people's heads. That's how they would know whether you were of fine Aryan stock or not, right? And I just about fell out of my chair laughing. I just couldn't believe that they were doing, head bump reading. And that was the state of science back then, which is why you always need to keep your skeptical point of view in place, no matter what time period or what subject matter you're looking at. Keep that critical thinking going. Because the Nazis took themselves really seriously, and they were just about as wrong as you could possibly be with all of that, but very certain. They were very certain
Very
people.
certain indeed. And even Hitler at the very end, one of the things that's not really had enough currency, I found so much information at the very end in the bunker. He writes a statement where he says he knows the Jews are not a race. And you're going, tell the neo-Nazis that. How did it take you so long to work this out, Adolf?
Exactly.
But he also says that Germany deserves to be defeated and all Germans deserve to die because they have proved unworthy. So I hope that any Germans watching this won't take that literally.
Yeah,
Don't
right.
listen to him. Don't listen to him. He was wrong.
Oh, Hitler, you wacky guy. All right. Well, again, Jon, thank you very much. And this is actually, we got this book out right now. I really want you guys to check it out. There's more coming. Jon's got all kinds of things in the mix right now we're not even talking about. So there's more to learn and more foundational information about Scientology and about other, events, current and otherwise, that you'll be seeing from Jon in the hopefully not too distant future. So that's all the tease I've got for everybody out there. But do check it out. I will put the link to Jon's YouTube channel down there and to his book on Amazon, and you can go from there. Again, Jon, thank you very much for showing up this week.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much.
Awesome, man. And folks out there, of course, thank you for, putting up with my constant interruptions as Jon is telling his story here. Appreciate that. And I appreciate your viewership and your support of this channel and my work. So please continue to do so. And if it occurs to you that maybe, the stuff here is educational, informative, and entertaining enough to support financially, then of course you could always sign up on Patreon or show me some love through PayPal or anything like that. Links below to all of that. All right, folks, I will see you guys next week. Thanks for coming around. Bye-bye.
Thank you.